Romans 8:1. Here we go. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this apart in a couple of different sections, beginning with the two words, therefore, now. And notice, look at the verse and notice that Paul could have said this in a number of different ways with the words that are there. He could have said, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. He could have said, there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And he could have said, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But he didn't say any of those things. What he said is, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And he said this to emphasize the point that chapter 8 is making and the point of this sentence. Anytime we see something repeated in the Bible, we should perk our ears up, tune in with our eyes, and say, what is God emphasizing here? And he is emphasizing here all of chapter 8 with the very beginning of chapter 8 in verse 1. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And of course, these words, therefore now, are pointing back to everything that he's already said, especially in Romans chapter 1 through 5, where he explains the gospel. In chapter 5, he says that therefore those who are in Christ now have peace with God. Here he's kind of saying the same thing, but in the negative. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. He is screaming at us to pay attention to this sentence and everything that follows. Secondly, we need to hone in on the words, those who are in Christ Jesus, and what those words mean and who it is talking about. All throughout the Bible, there's this idea that sinners cannot enter into the presence of God because of their sin and unrighteousness and ungodliness, and God's righteousness and holiness. In Exodus 33, there's a moment where Moses wants to see the glory of God. And what winds up happening is God hides Moses in the cleft of a rock and then passes by and just allows Moses to partially see his glory. And God protects him inside the cleft of the rock. And this idea of being in Christ is the idea of the sinner entering into the cleft of the rock and being hidden and protected in Christ. Not because God hates us, but because God is bringing us into a relationship with him. And this becomes more vivid when we deal with the other parts of this verse, namely the word condemnation. Condemnation, that word, speaks of everything from our guilty verdict to the rendering of our full judgment and the full weight of judgment upon our sin. In Romans 3:9 and 10, Paul says, what then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. So Paul in Romans chapter 3 reads the guilty verdict of all humanity, and he uses these words of under sin, and it communicates a couple of different things. One, all of humanity is under the power of sin. We are like slaves that cannot gain our own freedom. We cannot break the bondage of sin. And part of coming to faith in Christ is recognizing our own enslavement to that sin and our inability to break those chains. It also indicates that we are under the penalty of sin. In Ephesians 2:1, Paul says that the church, and as individuals prior to coming to Christ, we were dead in our trespasses and sins. And he's describing two things with that word dead. He's talking about our inability to do anything to contribute to our own salvation, but he's also talking about the idea of our death sentence. Have you seen the movie The Green Mile? The man who is on death row comes walking into the jail, and the jailer that's escorting him just repeats over and over again, dead man walking, dead man walking. Because he's saying that this man is alive, but practically he's dead because he will be executed. So we are under the power of sin, and we are under the penalty of sin as sinners. And this is the idea that one word, condemnation, carries. As sinners outside of Christ, we are condemned. We are still under the power of sin. We are still under the bondage of sin. And not only that, but we're dead men walking, alive in some sense, but only for a time, because we will pay the penalty of our sin, which according to Romans 6:23 is death. Now, this is the part where we need to zoom out on this whole verse and read it again. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So those who have placed faith in Christ, those who have hidden themselves in Him as their cleft, there is no power of sin over them, and there is no penalty of sin awaiting for them. Man, that is good news. So let me ask you, are you in